Andrea Afra with Sucs For You in Houston, Texas, and I posted on the community page asking for your ideas for video topics a while back and got some really good suggestions, but I really like subscriber Earphone's idea asking me to discuss some stories of my succulent fails, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. I went back through a bunch of my plant photos, and yes, not all of them are still with me. After making a list of the most common mistakes I made, it's apparent watering was a major factor, and not just overwatering, but watering at the wrong time. So we'll start there and see what I did wrong so you can learn from my mistakes. This is Portulaca molokiniensis, and I won this lovely plant in a contest on Instagram a few years ago. Unfortunately, it was lost in the mail for nearly 2 weeks, but when I opened the box, they still looked like they had some life in them, so I did my best to nurse them back to health. The roots were really dry and weak, and the leaves were very thin from lack of water for so long. It arrived mid-September when it's still really hot and humid here, but I thought they'd be okay since they're native to Hawaii, where it's hot and humid pretty much year-round. Luckily, I was able to get them established, and over the next several months, they began to put out new growth. But the following summer, they started dropping leaves, and I thought maybe they needed more frequent watering, so I started watering them more. I still let the soil dry out, but not for long. And anyways, long story short, now I know they were acting like they were heat dormant. I was watering them when they needed to rest, and my attempt to revive them was just making things worse. And one by one, the leaves continued to drop, and I continued to water them, hoping they would recover, and they never did. Well, that was one lesson that taught me to respect the fact that just because it's hot doesn't mean a succulent needs more water. They slow their growth to conserve energy, and watering them more will only damage the root system since the roots are resting too. Y'all, I know it takes a lot of restraint to refrain from watering more during the hottest time of the year, and I've got better at holding back, but I still have to fight the urge, and I lost this plant 4 years ago. This is a Gaster Aloe Royal Highness. It's a hybrid of a Gasteria and an aloe, and it was a near victim of overwatering during a heat or summer dormancy. It was so juicy and perky, but one day I noticed some of the inner leaves were turning translucent, and when I pulled it out of the pot, it just started falling apart. And I think a big part of the problem was that I had watered it not only when it was really hot out, but it was sitting in a spot on the porch where it got a few hours of direct afternoon sun, which is a big no-no, and I knew that. So basically, I poached it, which is not a good thing. I don't have any photos because I went into emergency rescue mode, but I do have a few Instagram stories that I archived. Sorry the quality isn't that great, but I just wanted you to see what I was dealing with. I started by removing all the healthy offsets and then pulled the dead leaves from the main plant and then cut away a big chunk of soggy, rotten roots. It was really sad. I kept it unpotted for over a week. I think it was closer to 2 weeks, and watched for any more signs of rotting before potting it back up in dry soil. And I was sure to move it to a spot where it wouldn't get any direct sun. Eventually it started regrowing new offshoots, and the main plant started filling up again, and luckily I was able to save it, and it's doing really great now. Now, as for cold dormancy or winter dormant plants, I don't really have any good photos of plants I've lost to overwatering when it's too cold or when they're winter dormant, but I've definitely made the mistake of watering too much when it's really cold here. As with heat dormant succulents, it'll probably stop growing when the temperatures drop below 60 degrees or 15 Celsius, and watering them too much at this time will harm the roots and probably cause them to rot. And since soil will take longer to dry out in colder weather, it's really important to water as little as possible if you're keeping your plants outdoors during the winter. Of course, most succulents can't tolerate frost or freezing, especially if you live in a climate that has mild winters, because they're just not acclimated to the cold. It does freeze here in Houston on occasion, but it's rare it stays below freezing for more than several hours. We did get an unexpected hard freeze back in January of 2018, and even though I did my best to cover as many as I could, I still lost a lot of plants, along with most of the city. The next day, it was crazy driving around and seeing so many dead plants everywhere. Flowers, shrubs, trees, and of course it had rained a lot before it froze, and the results were what you would expect. Sad and nasty. Another thing I have to be really careful about here is using glazed pots. They're not porous like unglazed terracotta, and not only do they prevent the soil from drying out as quickly, they absorb and radiate more heat. And of course, that can be a good thing if it's cold out, but otherwise, it can be problematic, especially in humid climates like Houston. So we've learned watering when it's hot outside can do more harm than good if the plants are resting in order to conserve their energy. And watering when a succulent is cold or winter dormant is a great way to ruin the root system, which is not a good thing. Of course, that leaves us wondering how much should we be watering them during these dormant periods, if at all? Well, it's going to come down to the type of plant and how fast the soil will dry out. So the only reason we want to water them at all is just to keep the roots from dying off. Most cold dormant succulents will be able to survive at least a month without any water, and I'd say you can push that to 6 to 8 weeks if you're really sure they're not like actively growing. Some people don't water at all during the coldest months, so that could be 3 to 4 months without water, depending on the climate. And if it does freeze where you're located and you overwinter your succulents indoors where the temperature is regulated, it's still a good idea to restrict their water to a minimal amount. And this is because a lot of plants need a rest period to thrive and maintain their normal growth cycle, especially if you want them to flower when the time is right. So cutting back on watering will encourage them to slow their growth, which is really helpful if you don't have a lot of good natural light indoors, and slowing their growth will help prevent etiolation or stretching so the plants keep their form instead of getting all tall and wonky. As for watering during a heat or summer dormancy, stick to the same plan. Try to only water enough to give the roots a little sip every 4 to 8 weeks if the plant seems to need it. Of course, you can search the internet for whether or not a variety is typically winter or summer dormant, but in extreme temperatures, whether hot or cold, you can be pretty sure most of them will enter a rest period. We're all learning along with each other, and I hope that sharing my past mistakes will help you avoid them in the future. And if you haven't read my book, The Succulent Manual, yet, it's packed full of great information and will answer the majority of your questions you have about keeping your succulents alive, thriving, and multiplying, so please consider giving it a read. Take care of yourselves, and thank you so much for watching.